In 1976, the United States celebrated a historic national milestone known as the United States Bicentennial, marking 200 years of independence since the signing of the American Declaration of Independence in 1776. This event was one of the largest patriotic celebrations in American history and symbolized 2 centuries of the nation's political development, cultural growth, and democratic traditions. Throughout the year, Americans across the country participated in grand celebrations, parades, festivals, concerts, and historical exhibitions designed to honor the country's founding ideals of liberty, democracy, and national unity. Cities, towns, and communities decorated streets with red, white, and blue flags, while schools, museums, and historical societies organized special programs to educate citizens about the nation's revolutionary origins and the struggles that led to independence from Great Britain. The bicentennial was not only a celebration of the past but also an opportunity for Americans to reflect on their national identity and achievements after 2 centuries of history that included the expansion of the nation across the continent, the American Civil War, industrialization, and the country's emergence as a global superpower after World War II. The U.S. government created the American Revolution Bicentennial Administration to coordinate nationwide events and encourage local communities to host their own celebrations. One of the most memorable events of the bicentennial year was the arrival of the Tall Ships Fleet in New York City, where ships from many nations sailed into the harbor in a grand display of international friendship and maritime tradition. Millions of spectators gathered along the waterfront to witness the spectacle, making it one of the most iconic moments of the celebrations. The bicentennial also included a special program called the Bicentennial Wagon Train Pilgrimage, in which participants traveled across the country in covered wagons to recreate the experience of early American pioneers. This journey symbolized the nation's westward expansion and the adventurous spirit of its early settlers. In Philadelphia, the historic city where the Declaration of Independence had originally been signed, major ceremonies and historical reenactments took place to commemorate the founding of the United States. The famous Liberty Bell, a powerful symbol of American freedom, attracted millions of visitors who came to witness the historic artifact and participate in the celebrations. Cultural and artistic projects also played an important role in the bicentennial year. The government supported the creation of monuments, historical restorations, documentaries, and educational materials that explored the nation's past and its democratic ideals. Television networks, newspapers, and schools produced special programs highlighting the stories of the George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and other leaders of the American Revolution, reminding Americans of the courage and vision that led to the birth of their country. Music and art also reflected the patriotic spirit of the bicentennial, with concerts, exhibitions, and performances celebrating American culture and diversity. On July 4, 1976, the official Independence Day celebration was especially spectacular. Across the United States, fireworks displays illuminated the skies, patriotic songs were performed, and millions of Americans gathered in parks, public squares, and historic landmarks to celebrate their country's 200th birthday. In Washington, D.C., the capital city, a massive national celebration took place near the National Mall, attended by large crowds and broadcast on television to millions of viewers across the country. President Gerald Ford played a central role in the national ceremonies, emphasizing the importance of unity, democracy, and civic responsibility as the United States entered its 3rd century as an independent nation. The bicentennial also inspired a renewed interest in American history, leading many communities to restore historic buildings, preserve landmarks, and establish museums dedicated to the nation's heritage. Educational programs encouraged young Americans to learn more about their country's founding principles, including freedom, equality, and representative government. For many citizens, the bicentennial served as a moment of reflection during a challenging period in U.S. history that followed the Vietnam War and the political turmoil of the Watergate scandal. The celebrations helped strengthen national pride and provided an opportunity for Americans to come together in a spirit of unity and optimism about the future. By honoring the past while looking toward the future, the United States Bicentennial of 1976 became a powerful reminder of the nation's enduring commitment to democracy and freedom. Even decades later, the bicentennial remains one of the most memorable national celebrations in American history, symbolizing the resilience, diversity, and democratic ideals that continue to shape the identity of the United States. The late Cold War period, 1977 to 1991, was a crucial phase in global history during which tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union gradually moved toward negotiation and eventual resolution after decades of rivalry known as the Cold War, which had dominated world politics since the end of World War II. This period saw the leadership of 3 important American presidents, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, and George H.W. Bush, whose policies and decisions shaped the final outcome of the ideological struggle between capitalism and communism. When Jimmy Carter became president in 1977, the United States was emerging from a difficult period marked by the Vietnam War and the political damage caused by the Watergate scandal, which had weakened public trust in government and America's global image. Carter believed that American foreign policy should focus on human rights, diplomacy, and peaceful negotiation rather than relying primarily on military power, and he emphasized the moral responsibility of the United States to promote democratic values around the world. His administration openly criticized governments that violated human rights and encouraged political reforms in many countries, arguing that America's credibility as a democratic nation depended on defending the rights and freedoms of individuals everywhere. One of the most remarkable diplomatic achievements of Carter's presidency was the negotiation of the Camp David Accords in 1978, a historic agreement that helped bring peace between Egypt and Israel, two nations that had fought several wars since the establishment of Israel in 1948. Determined to resolve this long-standing conflict, Carter invited Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin to the presidential retreat at Camp David in Maryland, where intense negotiations took place over nearly 2 weeks. Acting as a mediator, Carter worked tirelessly to bridge the deep political and security differences between the two leaders, and eventually the talks produced an agreement that laid the foundation for the Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty of 1979. Under this agreement, Egypt officially recognized Israel and Israel agreed to withdraw from the Sinai Peninsula, making Egypt the first Arab nation to establish diplomatic relations with Israel and significantly reducing the likelihood of further large-scale wars in the region. The Camp David Accords were widely celebrated as a major success for international diplomacy and strengthened Carter's reputation as a peacemaker, demonstrating that persistent negotiation could resolve conflicts that had seemed impossible to settle. However, Carter's presidency soon faced a serious challenge that overshadowed many of his achievements: the Iran hostage crisis of 1979 to 1981. The crisis began when a revolution in Iran overthrew the government of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah who had been a close ally of the United States, and brought the Islamic cleric Ruhollah Khomeini to power. After the Shah was allowed to enter the United States for medical treatment, Iranian militants stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran in November 1979 and took 52 American diplomats and citizens hostage, accusing the United States of interfering in Iran's internal affairs. The hostages were held for 444 days, creating a prolonged international crisis that dominated American politics and damaged Carter's popularity at home. Efforts to negotiate the hostages' release were slow and complicated, and a military rescue mission known as Operation Eagle Claw failed when mechanical problems and an accident in the Iranian desert forced the mission to be aborted, resulting in the deaths of 8 American servicemen. The hostages were finally released in January 1981, shortly after Carter left office, marking the end of one of the most dramatic diplomatic crises of the late Cold War. Carter was succeeded by Ronald Reagan, whose presidency from 1981 to 1989 introduced a more assertive approach toward the Soviet Union while also reshaping the American economy. Reagan strongly opposed communism and believed that the United States needed to rebuild its military strength and economic power in order to confront Soviet influence effectively. During the early years of his administration, he increased defense spending and criticized the Soviet government, famously describing it as an evil empire, reflecting his belief that communism threatened global freedom and democracy. At the same time, Reagan implemented economic reforms known as Reaganomics, a set of policies based on supply-side economics that aimed to stimulate economic growth by reducing taxes, cutting government regulation, and encouraging private investment. Supporters argued that these policies helped expand the American economy during the 1980s, while critics pointed out that they also increased the national debt and economic inequality. Despite these debates, Reagan's economic strategy had a major influence on American economic policy and political discussions about the role of government in the economy. In the later years of his presidency, Reagan's relationship with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev became one of the most important factors in reducing Cold War tensions. Gorbachev recognized that the Soviet Union needed major reforms to address economic problems and introduced policies such as perestroika and glasnost to modernize the system. Reagan and Gorbachev met several times to discuss arms control and global security, and their negotiations eventually produced the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in 1987, which eliminated an entire class of nuclear missiles and represented a significant step toward reducing the threat of nuclear war. By the time George H.W. Bush became president in 1989, dramatic political changes were already taking place across Eastern Europe, where many countries were challenging communist rule. One of the most powerful symbols of these changes was the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, when massive public demonstrations in East Germany forced the government to open the border between East and West Berlin, allowing citizens to travel freely for the first time in decades. The destruction of the wall symbolized the collapse of communist control in Eastern Europe and the growing demand for political freedom. These transformations continued until the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, when economic difficulties, political reforms, and nationalist movements led the Soviet republics to declare independence, effectively ending the Soviet state and bringing the Cold War to a close. During Bush's presidency, the United States also confronted a major international crisis when Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in 1990, prompting the United States to organize a multinational coalition that launched the Gulf War in 1991, a military campaign that quickly defeated Iraqi forces and restored Kuwait's independence, demonstrating the continued global leadership and military strength of the United States in the new post-Cold War era.